Hello and thanks for joining us at interest.co.nz. I'm Janae Tibbs-Rainey and today I'm joined by Green Party co-leader James Shaw. Hello, James.
Hello.
The Green Party over the weekend released its first policy that it will take to the election. It's pledging to introduce a guaranteed minimum income of $325 a week, and it's saying that this will be paid for by the introduction of a wealth tax and two new top income tax brackets. James, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern this morning, when asked about this policy, she said that she imagined the Labour Party policy to look very different to what the Green Party is proposing. If Labour and the Greens formed a government after the election, do you think a wealth tax or two top income tax brackets would even get a look at?
Oh, I absolutely think it'll get a look in, but ultimately our ability to negotiate the program of the next government will depend on how many MPs we've got and the extent to which Labour needs us in order to be able to govern. That's just the political reality of it. What we're saying here is that if people actually are serious about ending poverty in New Zealand, there is a way that we can do that, and here is a way that we can also pay for it. And if you think that that's a good plan, please give your party vote to the Green Party. We'll see how the chips fall on Saturday, the 19th of September, and then we can sit down with Labour and say, okay, how are we going to make this work?
The Prime Minister also said that the Green Party had made some heroic assumptions, particularly around the tax revenue that would be generated. I just wanted to talk about the $7.9 billion that the Green Party estimates will be collected in revenue from people who pay this wealth tax. So the party has projected that 6% of the population would be affected by this. And I've just done a bit of rough math, and 6% of the population is about 300,000 people. And if you take $7.9 billion, divide that by 300,000 people, you get just over $26,000. So the projections are that about 300,000 people would pay about $26,000 a year. That sounds quite high. You're obviously confident in these numbers?
Yes, we are. The numbers come from two sources, one of which is Stats NZ's Household Economics Survey, which is obviously a long-running data set. And the other is from the Reserve Bank, and they have a sort of a different way of calculating wealth accumulation in New Zealand. We essentially took those two data sets and we put them together in a model that was developed for us by the Parliamentary Library. We then knocked a third off for the sake of conservative estimating, and we were left with that number of about 7.9 billion. So I'm feeling pretty confident in that, although I recognise that, neither there is no kind of perfect way of measuring wealth in New Zealand, whether you do it via the Stats NZ method or the Reserve Bank modelling. But that is as good a guess as you are going to get in government at the moment.
All right. One of the ways that people do often hide their assets and hide their money is through trusts. And people have been raising some questions via Twitter since you announced the policy around this. What would you say to people who are worried that wealth would just be hidden trusts?
Well, we are going to apply it to trusts at the 2% rate. So remember, there are two rates here. So on wealth over $1 million, the rate is 1%. On wealth over $2 million, the rate is 2%. What we'll do is apply the 2% rate to trusts unless someone wants to declare that they're the personal beneficiary, and if the asset is worth less than that, then they'll get taxed at the lower rate, right? So that's an incentive for people to be transparent about it. And over the course of the last few years, there has been a significant amount of work done by Inland Revenue and by Parliament actually to sort of look-through mechanisms for trusts. So we've actually got a much better idea, and that whole regime is much more transparent than it was only a few years ago.
Do you believe that there needs to be a trusts register so that you could look up trusts in the same way that you can look up companies and see who directors and shareholders of companies are, for example?
Yeah, look, we didn't explore that within the scope of this policy. I'm not averse to it, although, I recognise that there are privacy concerns that we would need to manage. And I have to say, I think that the work that's been done through Inland Revenue and in the government, and actually the previous government, to their credit, actually started to kind of clean up trusts before the government changed, and we've extended that work program. I think that that's left us in a pretty good place, although there's obviously always more work you can do.
Okay. Look, in terms of the other sort of nuts and bolts of how this wealth tax would work, property is probably fairly easy to value. How would it work for shares and bonds? Would you say that, look, at this date, your wealth is the value of your equities and bonds at a certain date, or how would you do that?
Yeah, yes, you do it. Yes, you do it on a date each year. And I don't think that that's terribly complicated. I've been thinking that in most cases, you already have some record somewhere, so one of the other classes of asset that people have been saying is, well, what about, really expensive artworks, for example, and we've said basically items under $50,000 would be excluded so that you're not kind of worrying about the kind of, rats and mice type stuff. But big things, of course, if you had an artwork that was valued at $100,000, you would have that insured, right? So you'd actually already have the valuation worked out for the sake of insurance. So in virtually every category, it's actually not hard to come up with a valuation. The one area that we think needs work on valuations is businesses, where, if you ask anybody who's been in that game, there are many different ways of valuing businesses, but actually, so we did a sort of a rough calculation based on kind of 1 year's revenue, and actually we think that it would be not too hard for Inland Revenue to develop a fairly simple and straightforward valuation calculator, which people could use. But if they wanted to go and get their business valued elsewhere, then we'd accept that too.
Okay, yeah, because that has been some of the commentary that's came out as well, that this would just be a bit of a gift for tax lawyers and accountants, which is obviously not what you'd want.
Not the intention, no. I mean, actually, so New Zealand has been very successful over the last 3 decades in terms of the design of its tax system, with this idea of low rate, broad base. And so actually we have simply applied those principles to this as well. So it's a low rate at 1%, or, moves up to 2% for wealth over $2 million. It's broad based because it covers everything. And really rather than having category exemptions, you simply have an exemption on all wealth under $1 million, which is why 94% of New Zealanders won't pay any additional tax under this system. And because it's so simple and so straightforward, you won't get the kind of movement between different categories of asset that you do in other countries where they've tried to apply these sort of taxes on assets, but only on some classes. And I think if you do that, then you end up in a world of pain, like a lot of other countries have.
Yeah, and actually that does bring me to something else that I wanted to ask you, which was, what is the objective of the wealth tax? Like, is it to raise revenue to then pay for the sort of universal type income or payments, or is it to encourage investment in certain assets? Because I can't see how this would encourage me to invest in a more productive asset like a business versus, expanding on my super expensive house, for example. Hypothetically speaking, if I had either of those.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, lucky you. Well, no, I mean, what we feel that it's important to to have something that's neutral in terms of asset classes, so as not to produce kind of perverse behavior, and I think that the way that we've designed should encourage that. I mean, the intention is to raise revenue, right? I mean, if you're really serious about eliminating poverty in New Zealand, that does come with a price tag that's got to be paid somehow. And there is a risk, of course, with all the stimulus money that we're putting into the economy at the moment, ending up in an asset price bubble the way it did under the GFC, particularly in Europe and North America. And actually, you're seeing some of that here already, with the stock market valuation still being very high, the property market still being very high, despite the fact that what you might describe as the real economy having some real challenges in front of it. And so here is a way of ensuring that whilst things like the wage subsidy might be flowing through the people who need it the most, it is actually ending up ultimately with landlords and banks. And so a wealth tax actually helps you to recoup some of that and ensure that it actually does get to and stay with the people who need it the most. And of course, it's people at the bottom of the pyramid who actually spend that money in what you and I might describe as the real economy, right? Because they spend it on, food and power and, transport and things like that. So it actually has a stimulatory effect in itself.
That's a really good point. If you are receiving $250 a week for job seeker support, and that goes up to $340, $325.
$325.
Yeah, you will spend that extra money. You're not just going to bank it. So I think
no, you can't. I mean, that's the thing, is that at the moment, the job seeker benefit doesn't cover people's basic cost of living. That was what the Welfare Expert Advisory Group made absolutely clear, is that even at $325, it's still a real stretch if you consider what most people are paying in rent, right? So it's actually not a lot of money in that sense.
Yeah. Okay. So just to go back to the other question, that this is it's raising revenue, so redistributing wealth, redistributing things a bit, as opposed to actually trying to use the tax system to incentivize investment in certain asset classes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you certainly can use the tax system to incentivize, investment in asset classes. And I do think, because in New Zealand, a lot of our wealth is tied up in land and property, that the effect of this may be to move some of that around, to kind of help to sort of neutralize that. But that's not the intention here. But, trust me, there will be kind of other policy domains where we say, look, we need to focus more on the productive economy. How do we do that? But that's not the intention of this policy.
Right. Something else that people have raised is concern around people being asset rich but income poor. So the Green Party has said that for retirees, for example, they can defer the payment of the tax until the time they sell the assets. So if they're living in a $2 million house but don't have any income, they can pay it when they sell it.
That's right.
How would that work for other people who might have an income but might have their money sort of structured in such a way that they don't have they might not feel like they have extra cash sitting there to pay? How flexible do you think you'd be around?
Oh, no, it's a choice. So you would simply have the choice.
Okay.
We wouldn't be, remember, a big part of what we're trying to do here is eliminate bureaucracy and to really simplify and strip things back. So you don't want to get into like a whole other layer of means testing or anything like that to say, pay now or pay later. I just think the point here is to say, here is your liability for this year. You can either pay it this year or you can defer it until such time as, you think that your circumstances have changed to be able to pay that.
Okay. James Shaw, thank you so much for your time. It is good to get into sort of campaign mode with some good crunchy tax policy to debate, to get everyone thinking about these things. So thanks for explaining the policy to us. And I'm Janae Tibshirani from interest.co.nz.